We have a chancellor who is the wealthiest MP within the chamber. He comes from a family of billionaires. He was privately educated and then worked as an investment banker. And the cabinet itself is, 67% privately educated. So there is a clear segment of society that these MPs are coming from. And we see that in the policies that they're pursuing and whose interests they're serving, while they're clapping on Thursdays for NHS workers and public sector workers. They are not putting money where their hands are or where their mouth is, and I think it's incredibly shameful. And I think people need to hold them to account at the ballot box, but even before then as well.
Zara, hello.
Owen, hi.
Hey, look at us just zooming away in this brave new world.
I know, it's crazy.
Do you think we're going to get used to it, going back to the old world where we have to be in the same room and chat to each other?
I mean, I'd like to, but I think the traveling between events, I'm kind of preferring, just being able to do it as long as there's a good Wi-Fi connection. So
yeah, it's fine. I mean, it's a busy time. You've actually just come from a parliamentary debate, which is about, of course, the spending review. So let's have a little update. Give people a bit of insider. You were in the chamber. You've got the Chancellor of the Exchequer cutting, in real terms, lots of public sector workers. What was going on? Tell me the atmosphere in the Commons and what was it all about?
So I wasn't actually in the chamber for the spending review today. Unfortunately, I didn't make the call list. I've been quite lucky this year, my first year, to get on the call list quite often, but not today. But we know what Rishi Sunak has announced, and that's a public sector pay freeze. And when you take inflation into account, that's a real cut to people's wages. And that the Conservatives have also reneged on increasing the national minimum wage. And while we thought, the days of austerity might be far behind us because the economic argument has been defeated, within society, we see a move by this government to make the poorest in our society carry the burden of this pandemic, when it's those with the broadest shoulders, the wealthiest, who should be doing that.
I mean, how do you feel about the fact many of those Tory ministers, of course, were clapping out of windows, porches, balconies for key workers? They were celebrated, national heroes. And now in real terms, a lot of them are getting pay cuts.
I mean, at the time, we could, see right through it. We have a chancellor who is the wealthiest MP within the chamber. He comes from a family of billionaires. He was privately educated and then worked as an investment banker. And the cabinet itself is, 67% privately educated. So there is a clear segment of society that these MPs are coming from. And we see that in the policies that they're pursuing and whose interests they're serving, while they're clapping on Thursdays for NHS workers and public sector workers. They are not putting money where their hands are or where their mouth is. And I think it's incredibly shameful. And I think, people need to hold them to account at the ballot box, but even before then as well.
I mean, one thing I was writing about today was statutory sick pay. And Matt Hancock said this week that the British are peculiarly unusual in going into work when they're sick, and suggest it was like a cultural thing that people, just couldn't keep away from the office. When actually I've been interviewing all these.
It's definitely not that they can't keep away, because it's so woefully low. It's one of the lowest in, Europe, at least Western Europe. People literally can't afford to stay away. And when we have a public health pandemic like we have right now, that affects us all. We need to make sure that those on the lowest wages are protected, by the social security system. And I think, the fact that it's £92 a week is shameful. And Matt Hancock as well said that he couldn't live off it. So if these MPs can't live off it, how do they expect everyone else to?
Let's have a little chat about you. Don't worry, I won't spring anything excessively personal or anything. Just about you, because you're 27 now. How did you get in? How did you become political? What was it that kind of drew you to politics?
So my family, I'm one of 4 girls, so you can imagine how loud and rowdy our household is. So I was very opinionated, and I had political opinions at home, watching the news with my dad and so forth. When I think back to my earliest political memories, one of many is the Iraq War. I think the second is probably Princess Diana dying, because I do actually remember that. But going back to the Iraq War and kind of just following on that, it was the war on terror. So for a lot of people, the war on terror was Iraq, Afghanistan, drones in Pakistan, Yemen and elsewhere. But within the community that I grew up in, it was prevent in our schools, but also CCTV cameras under the guise of counterterrorism and prevent, that was spying on communities. So that really shaped my understanding and my place in society. And then I went to a comprehensive school, and it was a great school. My teachers were absolutely amazing. And we were always told, you have to, get good grades and so forth to be able to go to uni and be successful. However, there were others in society who didn't look at my school that well. We had a senior police officer in the West Midlands who'd never visited my school, went to Birmingham City Council and said, all of these kids, they can tell me what gangs they're going to end up in when they're older. So that was the way we were seen by those in, positions of authority and power. And then going to, sixth form and studying politics, but also seeing what was happening. So on one hand, it was a lot of politics happening to me rather than the other way forward. And it was at the height of the student movement back in 2010. The coalition government had announced that they were going to triple tuition fees. And I was watching all of this on Parliament TV, looking at the demonstrations happening in London, and it just made me so angry. I felt that we were being completely screwed over. We had EMA taken office. We were being saddled with debt. We were the generation that was really paying for the financial crisis that was caused by gambling bankers. So I was very angry, and I channeled that anger at university through my guild of students and the society. So I was involved with Palestine Society, Kashmir Society, the Black and Ethnic Minority Association, stuff around free education. Very eager first year student, I definitely was. And then I found out that the NUS was more than a discount card, and it was actually an organization that allowed young people, students, to get involved with the democracy of the organization, running elections, run campaigns. And I made some of my best friends through that organization, through the Black Students Campaign, where we fought on things from, the Black attainment gap to stopping deportations. We had an amazing Black Lives Matter solidarity tour. So very, very good times.
In less good times, but also mixed, I suppose.
And then what happened was in 2016, the Labour Party suddenly became another space to get involved with. I'd been a member since I was 17, found local Labour politics very exclusionary. I really couldn't get involved. CLPs being under special measures, all sorts of dynamics going on. But Jeremy Corbyn becomes leader of the Labour Party, someone I had seen at demonstrations, at pickets, at events. And suddenly it's like, oh, maybe there's a way for me to get involved with the Labour Party in a way that I hadn't done before. So I ran in the Young Labour National Executive elections. People talk about Scarborough. It's kind of like one of those really fun Twitter stories that people kind of go back to every now and then. But that was a big moment.
And then what made you want to become an MP?
Well, it's not something I ever wanted or thought that I could do. I had seen politicians who were pushing forward policy, from the Iraq War to the triple tuition fees. And I just felt like they weren't representing the interests of my generation and people who sounded like me. So I was always involved with, grassroots politics. I ran in the European elections, and that was the first party election I'd ever run in May earlier that year. And the reason I ran in that election, I knew that the chances of me becoming an MEP were very, very low. But I had seen the conversation nationally, and it disgusted me the way people were talking about migrants and how migrant bashing was a big part of that election. So I thought it was important as a young person, as someone who comes from a South Asian background, someone who is Muslim, to get involved and try to change some of that. And unfortunately, we didn't do very well in that election, and we've left the EU. But it was a fast-paced crash course in elections. And then, of course, we had the general much later that year, and I was strongly encouraged by comrades to put my name forward, and here I am.
So it's been a year now nearly since you were elected. A bittersweet evening, I would say. 12th of December, not a moment I'm going to forget in a hurry. Still wake up cold sweats thinking about that exit poll. But I mean, it's been a year since you've been. So you get elected. Labour Party has a massive leadership election. There's a massive global pandemic. The country's thrown in the biggest crisis since World War II. The economy's in turmoil. Quite a year to go through, I would say, as a newly elected member of parliament. I mean, sum up that experience. And do you ever think, oh, why did I do this?
When you put it like that, Owen, it's felt like whiplash, is how I describe it, a roller coaster. And at the very beginning, after my maiden speech, and we were setting up the offices, it felt like, oh, I'm kind of understanding the role a bit better. I'm adjusting. I know what I need to do. And just when all of us new MPs kind of thought we had our shit together, things massively changed. Coronavirus, COVID-19, the R rate, all of these terms that we had never used before in our lives have become very common terminology. And what that has meant is that most of my first year in Parliament has been under lockdown. A lot of things have just been done virtually. We had virtual, debates, but we've also had virtual voting, which has been never, done before. And I think that this pandemic, has shown many things, but I guess within like parliamentary policy, it's shown that we can be more inclusive. We can have proxy voting, we can have virtual voting, we can have virtual participation, which excludes so many people, from disabled people to people with other underlying health conditions, new mothers, people on parental leave, and it's shown that Parliament is stuck in an age where it really needs to be dragged out of.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that, one of the something I've been very passionate about, which I've written about, is politics should be a service, a duty, a responsibility, not a job in inverted quotes in a normal sense. But there's this phenomenon of MPs who take up second jobs, who often very close to lobbyists. This revolving door as well. Lots of politicians who end up later with these lucrative private sector positions, which kind of exploit their connections as politicians. I mean, what's your take on that? And what's your kind of, was it what you expected, that kind of element? I'm sure you probably were aware of it before, but was it worse than you expected, coming straight into contact with some of that?
I was aware of it because we had seen, MPs way before I got elected having second jobs and, going the revolving door between, lobbyists and MPs and the private sector. What shocked me was just how subtly it's done and how no one really kind of blinks an eye. When I received gifts or packages from Google and Heathrow, I was just like, what the hell is this? Especially because the Heathrow package I got was a food hamper. And also it had a message. It literally was telling me to support a third runway. So it's not like, people are hiding their intentions. And then as I kind of understood the parliamentary estate more and didn't get lost, I saw events being held in this parliamentary corridor, which is done for lobbyists. They basically host parliamentarians and have fancy food and wine and everything, and it's done very casually. So from the gifts to the events, to the donations made to, particularly the Conservative Party, and then also the trips abroad. There's an entire ecosystem of things happening, and it's highly undemocratic. Why isn't a nurse from Coventry able to influence MPs the same way, these lobbyists are doing so? I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's right, and I think it needs to be stopped.
In terms of Labour being an inclusive and welcoming place for minorities, I mean, firstly, of course, we had the HRC report recently, and anti-Semitism has been something which has caused a lot of hurt and distress to Jewish people in this country. What do you think the left and the Labour Party should do now to tackle anti-Semitism and rebuild some of those bridges with Britain's Jews?
The left has proud anti-racist traditions, but I don't think that means that we can be complacent or rest on our laurels. Anti-Semitism is a poison, and it exists within our party, it exists on the left, and it exists within wider society. And what we need to do, and what is a duty upon us all, is to root that out wherever we see it. And the EHRC report has made for very difficult reading. And what it has told us is that the Labour Party's processes and culture is wrong and needs to be changed. And there's a lot to learn from that report. And I hope that, all of us can unite on defeating anti-Semitism and showing solidarity with the Jewish community in this fight against anti-Semitism, because we all have a stake in it.
Another report issued by the Labour Muslim Network, and that was a study looking at both Muslim members of the Labour Party and wider Muslim supporters, found that 29%, more than 1 in 4, directly experienced Islamophobia in the party. That 46% disagree with the statement, "I believe the Labour Party represents the Muslim community effectively." These two were pretty damning findings. Given Islamophobia is, let's be honest, it's rampant, not just in British society, but in Europe and the United States, and politicians, demagogues openly use Islamophobia in much of the world in order to win support. What can Labour do as a party that flaunts its anti-racist credentials? What can it do to deal with that?
The report made for very uncomfortable reading, again, like the EHRC report, because it showed the party not being the anti-racist party that it needs to be. I know from my personal experience and from friends and family, the kind of Islamophobia that can exist within these spaces. And I think what is really important is that we understand that all of these struggles are interlinked. Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, transphobia, all of these different forms of discrimination are part of a collective fight that we all need to be part of. And there's a saying that there is safety in solidarity. And I think this is incredibly important for us to, not just say as a slogan, but actually act upon. And it's really important that as Labour Party members, as people on the left, that we show solidarity with communities when they are under attack, and those communities that face discrimination. Trans rights are human rights. There is nothing ambiguous about that. We need to show solidarity with the trans community. We need to show solidarity with the Jewish community, the Muslim community, and all communities that face, different types of oppression. But, it's something that there is no controversy, in my opinion, when it comes to fighting all of those, because, they're equal. There is no hierarchy.
I mean, the point you made there about trans rights, a lot of trans people at the moment are angry with the Labour Party, and a lot of younger people who, for whom trans rights is an article of faith, not least young Labour supporters. They have trans relatives, they have trans friends, they've seen the suffering, the discrimination they face in British society. They're not happy with Labour at the moment.
I think that is an understatement. And I think you're being very, good with your words on that. There's a lot of anger, and I've seen that from my friends, trans friends and non-trans friends, who are livid at what they're seeing, which is a lack of action, and they just don't feel like the party is where it needs to be when it comes to trans solidarity. And I think that is something that the leadership need to listen to. I think, when it comes to stakeholder engagement, when it comes to having good policy, Lotto and the leadership and the Labour Party as a whole needs to listen. And I think, the party's never going to improve or change for the better unless it's listening to the most marginalised, most vulnerable, and those communities that are affected.
A year ago, Jeremy Corbyn was standing to be the next Labour Prime Minister. He's now, he was suspended from the Labour Party, obviously, and then was readmitted, but the whip was withheld. What do you see? How do you see the way out there?
I think it was wrong to suspend Jeremy. I think it's wrong to take the whip off him, especially after a disciplinary process has cleared him. I think he should be sitting on the backbenches alongside me and many others as a Labour MP, fighting for all the things that we believe in, from migrant solidarity to, public ownership, and against, against the climate crisis, and fighting for that change that we need. And I think it's a really shameful situation that we see unfolding in front of us, especially when the Tories have basically created a situation where we are in a recession, people are losing their jobs, over 50,000 people have died from coronavirus, we are in the worst economic position within the G7, and rather than having this, I don't know what you want to call it, but we should be focusing our energies on a Conservative Party that is destroying the fabric of society and has done for the past 10 years. Like, this is not where we should be putting our energies.
Keir Starmer, during the leadership election, issued what became known as the 10 pledges. It's a series of policy commitments such as scrapping tuition fees, increasing taxes on the rich in major corporations to invest in the economy, no more illegal wars, included common ownership. I'm not quite sure what he meant by that. Might find a get out for that at some point. But anyway, just a series, green industrial revolution. Do you think he meant it? And do you think that is the policy direction the Labour leadership are going to stick to?
I would like to think he meant everything that he committed to during the leadership race. Members voted for Keir on the basis of those pledges and the commitments that he made during the race. So I think it's really important that those are, implemented and those are still supported, especially because they were so popular and still are so popular with the membership. And also beyond the membership, we know that when it comes to public ownership of our utilities, when it comes to combating the climate crisis, when it comes to tenants' rights and all of these very important policies, they're wildly popular within the electorate. The climate emergency has been, the highest it's ever been at the last general election in terms of the concerns people have. And I think it's really important that we remind the leadership and act to influence that as well.
There are some on the left who think game over. The left has no future in the Labour Party. The leadership don't want the left. It's a waste of time. A lot of people have left the Labour Party. They've ripped up their membership cards. What do you say? Do you think what do you say to those who think forget it? Left's got no future in Labour. It's all over.
It has been so difficult this year, to be an ordinary person in the country. And then especially if you're on the left, especially if you're within the Labour Party, especially the past few months. And of course, I completely empathise, but our struggle has never been easy. Everything we have won has come through, a fight. And it has come because working people have demanded and marched and died for the rights that we now enjoy. So it's never been easy. And, even before Jeremy became leader, we went through some incredibly difficult years, and then we had a left leadership and there was hope. And I think it's really important that we remember that those hopeful moments and that can be something that we can see again if we just fight for it. So I think it's really important that people stay within the Labour Party, that they still push the left agenda, because if the left's not going to do it, then I can tell you the right ain't going to do it for us. So it's really important that we are there, that we are also, but that doesn't mean that we're not getting involved with other amazing groups within our communities, from tenants unions to our trade unions to the local food bank. We need to be involved in all of these spaces. It's not putting all of your eggs in one basket. It's saying that is important for the climate crisis, as well as many other issues, for us to have state power. How are we going to get state power? It's through the Labour Party. So if you're going to leave the Labour Party, then you're making that job incredibly hard.
You're a young MP. You're a millennial. I'm technically a millennial, but I'm an old millennial. You're a young millennial. A lot of younger people were attracted to Labour in the last few years, and it's understandable. Young people are getting clobbered. Housing crisis, saddled with debt, lack of secure jobs, wages stagnated, youth services / social security / we could go on. It's been tough. I mean, what do you think? How do you think Labour can stand up for young people? Are you confident they will do? I mean, you have a role, obviously, as you've got a new cohort of new young MPs, but where's Labour in all this? Because a lot of young people might now go, basically, Labour's not interested in us because the voters Labour is focused on winning are those in the so-called red wall seats, who are often older voters who voted Conservative, because it's younger voters overwhelmingly supported Labour, but older voters overwhelmingly supported the Conservatives. So where's the fight for young people in all this? And are they going to get abandoned by Labour now?
I think it would be a really flawed strategy for the party to think that young people will always vote for us. You know, Black people, Asian people, minority ethnic communities will always vote for the Labour Party. And we just, you know, will ignore them and not really do anything that they want. And I think for young people, you know, we both, you know, can claim to still be young.
More than me, Zara, I think. But anyway,
we've been completely screwed. You know, I have like 55K of student debt. I haven't received my statement this year, so it might be a bit more than that. But when we look at, you know, the opportunities within the job market, it's precarious work, low pay, 0-hour contracts. When you look at the housing market, how many young people, you know, are renting, how many people are being exploited by their landlords, it is, you know, it's shocking when you look at some of those statistics. So when we think about previous generations and how they've always had it one better than the generation that came before them, it doesn't apply to our generation. So we are sick of this system because it doesn't work for us. We have seen it destroy the planet. We have seen, you know, the housing completely not fit for purpose. It is a scandal the way our housing system works and who owns how much land in this country. And then when we look, you know, at all of these other crises that affect young people from the mental health crisis perspective as well, we need change. We're not going to just sit back and say, yeah, like a bit more of the status quo is fine. It's not acceptable. We've seen young people come to the streets when it comes to Black Lives Matter, when it comes to the climate emergency, when it comes to the A-level U-turn, because they're not going to let politicians kind of get away with it. And I think that's really important. So as a young MP, I feel a sense of responsibility. I have been shaped by the struggles of being a young millennial. You know, I've only ever rented myself. I have worked in, you know, low wage work, especially in retail. So those things have shaped me undeniably. And it's those struggles that I take into Parliament when we're debating on issues. It's young people and marginalized communities and those, you know, at the bottom of the food chain that I'm thinking about. And I think that's what drives me.
I mean, what we may well see, we're already seeing actually, is extra parliamentary movements grow. We've seen that with Black Lives Matter, of course, over the course of this year. We've already seen it with the climate, the struggle over the climate emergency, the climate strike, for example, the school walkouts over the issues, whether it be private tenants, whether it be the mass unemployment that could be going our way. How can the left engage with those extra parliamentary movements and those in the Labour Party? Because a lot of those people in the Labour Party, a lot of those people in those extra parliamentary movements might now be a bit not interested in Labour. They're not interested in extra parliamentary movements anymore. So how can that kind of dynamic happen, do you think?
The Tories have an 80-seat majority in Parliament. They can pass absolutely anything that they want. And, you know, as the Labour Party or as the opposition, we're always going to find it more difficult. And I think what you've mentioned with all of this grassroots activity that's happening around various issues, we really do see where power truly lies, and it's within our communities. So I think, you know, while we had the leadership, maybe some people, not everyone, forgot the importance of grassroots mobilization and grassroots, coordination. And I think that's what we need to be rebuilding, especially when we've seen mutual aid communities spring up and the work that they've been doing, helping neighbors and people that they don't know. We've seen, you know, all of that amazing work that's happening around food banks. And I think the left has an important job in supporting all of those different things happening and building. We've got amazing tenants unions in Coventry. We've got Acorn, you know, in London, you've got tenants unions, and across the country there's so many different types, and I think it's important that we are supporting them. As MPs, it's important to also, you know, advocate for them and fight for them as well, so we can have power really in both, right? Like that's what we want power within the Labour Party, and we want power in our communities as well. And then it's having a strong grassroots system or, you know, mobilization that actually holds the party accountable. And that's what we need. We need strong trade unions, we need strong organizations, and we need We need all of those things.
And finally, for those watching who are on the left, who basically just feel depressed about everything, they just think, we're living in a nightmare. Politically, there's no hope. What would you say to them?
It's difficult. I know. I really, really do know. And things look incredibly bleak right now. The challenges we face are, of course, also immense. You know, we're still going through a second wave when it comes to coronavirus, and we're also living through a climate emergency, and we haven't seen the full economic effects of what's about to come as well. So things are difficult, understatement, but we can do something about it. That isn't just a fixed thing that will happen to us, you know, inevitably. There are things that we can do, things that we can be proactive about. And I think it's important to remember that, you know, the civil rights movement, you know, any kind of like labor rights movement, people have always felt this despair that things will never change. You know, before we had an NHS, I don't think people could even envisage such an amazing institution, such an amazing public service. And now we have it. And, you know, for a lot of people, you know, it's probably very difficult to imagine a society without an NHS. I think that's what we need to remember, that things are difficult. But, you know, as a Liverpool fan, you know, after the storm, you know, there's light. I mean, I've really butchered "You'll Never Walk Alone" there because I'm rambling. But you know, at the end of the storm, there's a golden sky. There we go. I've redeemed myself. But that's what it is. It's like, you know, things are difficult, but this is when we come together. It's not when we give up. And this is where we can have beautiful, transformative change. This system has never worked for us. It never will unless we structurally, fundamentally change. And I think this is an opportunity to do that. But of course, with the current government, we're not going to get it through them. So we have to get it from ourselves and our communities.
I mean, you could almost say walk on with hope in your heart. It's been a real pleasure on that.
It's all of this with "You'll Never Walk Alone," and that will sum up everything that I've said, but even better.
I'm not sure about the copyright issue. My brother's a very dedicated Liverpool fan. He'd be happy, but it might alienate Ash Sarkar, for example. I can't maybe allow that.
It's fine because we beat them. We beat Tottenham at the Champions League, so it's calm.
Oh, it's all going to kick off. It was so much unity in the interview, and it's just collapsed.
No, when it comes to football, I'm sorry.
On that bombshell. Well, look, it was a big honour, Zarah. Thank you so much for taking part.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. Awesome to hear from one of Labour's youngest MPs. We've got a very broad range of people that we're going to be interviewing, chatting to, and some cracking videos which are going to give a platform to voices, causes that are otherwise marginalised. So please give us your support. If you go to Patreon/OwenJones84, that'll keep the team on the road. But please also subscribe to this YouTube channel. Go to the YouTube page, click on subscribe, but also on the bell to give you notifications so you know when videos are coming out. Awesome. I'll see you soon.